What's up, it's JG, and today I'm going to do a proper deep dive on SilverAsh Alter. We'll walk through all his skills and talents, compare them to his competition, and explain how all these quirky mechanics work. I'll also get into some theory crafting to help you come up with ideas for squeezing the most out of him. First up is Skill 3. I think it's the most interesting tool in his arsenal, so let's start there. The skill text is really long, and doesn't even cover everything it does. This one is a complicated mess. Let's dive in. First, it changes his attack range to this 3x3+1 shape that you see most frequently on core casters. The text just says, deals damage and inflicts fragile in a straight line. What that really means is he deals AoE damage. The attack shoots a projectile towards its primary target, but damages any surrounding enemies in that path. As a projectile attack, this means he can target aerial enemies. This alone gives him a spot in the Vanguard meta. It's the longest lasting, hardest hitting Vanguard skill we've ever seen. Saga and Voltusfolia gain around 100% attack and can hit all blocked enemies. SilverAsh can hit more targets and for a longer interval, with pretty comparable damage. And the fragile effect amplifies both his damage and the damage of anybody else who can target the same enemy. That's just part 1 of like 5 here. It also says, Eye the Blizzard is deployable, and says absolutely nothing about what it does. One other operator can do that same thing. They will make those straight line attacks from their own location. These attacks get the same range as SilverAsh based on the direction they're facing, and will also reveal invisibility. Whereas SilverAsh replaces his normal attacks with these attacks, the second operator still gets all their usual attacks. These attacks use SilverAsh's attack stat and base attack speed. There are 2 ways to control the operator that gets this ability. The first unit you deploy after the skill starts will gain the ability on deploy. Alternatively, you can deploy the Eye of the Blizzard on top of a unit to immediately give it to them, removing it from another unit if they already had it. The Eye of the Blizzard costs 19 DP, but immediately refunds its cost. So you need to have 19 DP, but you don't need to spend 19 DP. It has a 15-second redeploy time, and you're free to move this effect around as many times as you can manage in his skill cycle. That 15 seconds can be reduced by SilverAsh Classic's talent, or similar abilities. Then there's the DP swap. It swaps the cost of your highest and lowest DP operators. There are a couple of details worth understanding. First off, it picks the highest DP guard, caster, or sniper. It will only reduce the cost of another class if you have no guards, casters, or snipers in the waiting area, or if the only one you have is also your lowest cost operator. It only swaps the cost of operators, not summons or deployable devices. If multiple operators tie for DP cost, it sorts them by class, with guards on the left and casters on the right. I can't tell how it sorts within the class, but it's not based on where they are in your team lineup. It will only do a DP swap once per level. Retreating SilverAsh and redeploying him won't cause it to do a second swap. If it doesn't perform a swap the first time it activates though, perhaps because there aren't enough operators in the waiting area, it can do the swap on a subsequent activation. The DP change only lasts for 1 deployment, but it remembers their DP cost until they leave the field. If you retreat the operator who got more expensive, they'll refund DP based on their higher cost. If you swap a charger to be more expensive, you can retreat them for a full refund of the higher price. If you're ever unsure who will be swapped, just select your SilverAsh. A little icon on 2 of your characters will show if they'll be swapped. On top of all that, the skill generates DP. The long-term DP generation sits at about 0.7 myrtles, which is on par with the best combat-oriented Pioneer skills like Texas's S2 or Saga's S3. That covers S3. Now let's take on S2. It's still pretty complicated, but a bit less. S2 unleashes a big swing and a wide frontal arc that's familiar to owners of SilverAsh Classic. The damage on this one is fairly disappointing. Up to 380% damage on up to 6 enemies. That's about the same damage multiplier you get on the 4-star guard cutter. It also inflicts 1 stack of cold and removes invisibility for a few seconds. He can store 2 charges of this skill, and if you unleash them both at once, the cold will escalate to a freeze. It also reduces the DP cost of 1 operator. It says, nearest to the Eye of the Blizzard, prioritizing guards, casters, and snipers to the right. If you're pedantic like me, your first thought might be, that's not what closest means. Here's what it means. First, if there's a guard, caster, or sniper to the right of the Blizzard at 15 DP or higher, it will target the cheapest one. Second, if there's any other operator to the right of the Blizzard, then it targets the cheapest one. And finally, if there's no operator to the right of the Blizzard, then it targets the most expensive one to the left. As with S3, just select SilverAsh and it will show you whose cost will get reduced. After the DP cost reduction, all operators to the left of the blizzard, meaning any operator at 14 DP or less, will gain 1 charge of this skill up to a max of 2. Since this applies after the DP reduction, an operator with 25 DP or less who is targeted by the skill will pick up a charge. About half a second after being deployed, these operators will unleash those charges using their own base attack stat. If they have 2 charges, then like SilverAsh, they can inflict a freeze. Selecting SilverAsh will show an icon for any operators who have charges stored. I'll also point out that all of these effects are attached to your operators as soon as he triggers his skill. If he dies or retreats, units will retain their cheaper cost and still make their bonus attacks on deploy. This skill doesn't provide any real DP, but can provide 11 cost reduction every 17 seconds, if you count that as DP, which is sometimes fair and sometimes not. It's the best and most reliable DP skill in the game, at 1.4 myrtles on top of its decent combat utility. Finally, we have his S1. This one, at least, is easy to explain. It triggers automatically, so you don't need to pay attention to it. It generates 10 true DP and reduces an operator's cost by 5. It uses the same operator targeting rules as S2, except the Blizzard has a cost of 16 DP, so it might hit different operators first. It also grants that operator a barrier worth 50% of SilverAsh's max HP. That peaks at about 1100 HP, which is the equivalent of around 2 to 3 heals from a typical medic. That's not huge, but it's not nothing. As before, selecting SilverAsh will show who will be targeted and whether they have a barrier accumulated. This skill generates about 0.7 myrtles of true DP, which is on par with other Block 2 vanguards, but up to 1.1 myrtles if you count the cost reduction, which is great. That covers the skills. We'll hit talents really quickly too. Talent 1 concerns this Eye of the Blizzard that shows up on all his skills. Any operator who is ever to the left of the Blizzard gains 2 bonuses, skill charge up to +4 at E2, and reduced redeployment time up to 20% at E2. I phrased this carefully. It's a bonus for any operator who was to the left of the Blizzard. The bonus attaches to them when the Blizzard appears or their cost changes, and stays with them until consumed. If SilverAsh gets defeated or retreated, any operator who was to the left of the Blizzard before that will still get the bonus. If SilverAsh swaps DP cost of units from the left side and the right side of the Blizzard, both units will get the bonus. The unit who started cheaper got the bonus when SilverAsh deployed, and the unit who started more expensive got it when they swapped. SilverAsh also gets this bonus on every deployment, even if his DP cost has grown larger than the Blizzard's. And the Blizzard is always at the far right of the waiting zone within its cost, so operators who tie its cost always get the benefit. There's also a little quirk here that you might call a bug or an exploit. It concerns pairing SilverAsh with Mulesease. When Mulesease's flowing shape triggers its skill, it can clone any operator. They all have their DP reduced to 0, but can only be deployed on top of the flowing shape. Their DP returns to normal once you select one. But does being temporarily at 0 trigger the talent? Yes, indeed. Every single operator will get skill charge and reduced redeployment time. And if you trigger SilverAsh's S2 while they're in this state, every operator will also pick up S2 charges. S2's cost reduction targets whoever is at the far right, and does get applied once real DP costs come back. Talent 2 shows up when he gets to Elite 2. It grants frozen immunity, HP regen, and increased defense to himself and any other Kierag operators on the field. The regen and defense boost both double after a mere 15 seconds on the field. That about covers his mechanics, but let's talk a little about the strategy now. Which skills work the best, and how should you change your play based on which one you bring? S1 is almost never the right choice. The barrier is disappointing, so in almost every way, it's just a weaker S2. The one edge that it has is that it generates real DP. In something like Annihilation missions where you need some actual DP and not just cost reduction, you could maybe make a case for it. S2 is a very defensible choice, though. It does a ton to help you get operators on the field, and so it gets him to function a lot like a traditional Vanguard. While cost reduction isn't quite as good as true DP in most contexts, he generates so much of it and spreads it across so much of the team that it's hard to argue that it's not competitive with other Vanguards. If what you really want to do is deploy a bunch of medics and defenders early, it won't be the best. But assuming that you like to kill things, he will bring a bunch of units to the board quickly. There are a lot of interesting synergies with his S2. As he moves operators from the right side of the Blizzard to the left side, they pick up perks. They gain the skill charge and redeployment time benefits of his talent, so units like Surtur and Spectre can drop with their skill just 1 second away from activation. Other big nukers like Sakiko will get to their first skill cycle even faster than usual. Then there are the damage charges. At full mastery, this is a single physical strike at 380% of attack on up to 6 targets. As I noted earlier, that's basically the same as the 4-star guard cutter's skill at level 7. It's a pretty decent smack, but it's not insane. Your cheap units will pick up charges of these pretty quickly though, so most of your cheap units will deploy to the field dealing around 5,000 physical damage and freezing nearby enemies for 6 seconds if they survive that. Units all use their own attack stat. For units that start off to the left of the blizzard, their attack stats are all pretty similar to SilverAsh's. Somewhere in the 600 to 700 range is pretty common. They all hit roughly as hard as he does, but there are a few exceptions. First of all, the strikes trigger just a little after they deploy. If they have a skill that triggers immediately on deployment that increases their base attack, then they'll use that modified attack stat. There are some executors that do this, and a few merchants who can get their skill immediately thanks to the 4 DP skill charge from SilverAsh. Most of these can hit about 50% harder with this trick. Secondly, there are units with high attack who can have their DP reduced to the point that they pick up these charges. Mystic casters, hunters, or Deadeye snipers tend to have great attack stats. They can drop something like 2 hits of 4,000 to 5,000 damage immediately on deployment. Sakiko's S2 deploys with a 110% attack bonus that puts her a bit higher than this. The most broken unit I can find for this is Scotty. She has a nice base attack stat, and her S2 is an on-deploy skill that can bump her attack by 170%. Maxed, she can drop 2 hits of 13,000 damage in the first second of her deployment. I'm not sure exactly where you would need that, but it sounds pretty fun. Nerl the Radiant Knight is just a touch behind her. Let me know in the comments if you spot any other interesting pairings that I missed. It's worth talking about executors a little bit more here, because they also synergize nicely with SilverAsh. You tend to drop executors where you want to pump a bunch of damage into a target quickly. SilverAsh adds a ton of value to this. There's the extra damage that just straight up makes them better at their main job. Inflicting cold and freeze improves their survivability. Removing invisibility can let them pour damage into certain units without having to block them. And finally, he reduces their redeployment time by 20%, so you can cycle them more quickly. Other fast redeploy units like merchants can get some similar benefits, but I think executors are the ones that really shine. There's one last thing I'll call out about S2. Mostly I say that cost reduction isn't as good as DP generation, but there are 2 places where cost reduction is actually better. The first one is in Chapter 12, where the DP limit is severely reduced. If you can only deploy units that cost 20 DP or less, S2 will let you get certain units on the map that would otherwise be off limits. The other one is pretty similar. In maps with 2 phases, or where all of your units are force retreated or just wiped by a dangerous enemy, you sometimes find yourself needing to redeploy your entire team quickly. 99 DP can disappear really quickly when a bunch of your units cost 30 or more DP to deploy. With proper planning, you can use S2 to reduce that second deployment cost of units down to a point where you can actually field your whole team. Remember, he spits out cost reduction faster than anybody else spits out DP. So overall, S2 pairs well with executors and high attack DPS units, especially ones at 25 DP or less. It's pretty flexible overall, and he helps you get lots of units on the map, both early in the level and in a second wave. Then we have S3. The reason S2 and S3 are both so viable is because they do such completely different things. S2 provides consistent value across the whole level. S3 provides a huge early boost and a huge boost against bosses. S2 is probably the better everyday use skill, but S3 is the one you'll want for things like contingency contracts, boss battles, and challenge mode levels. The damage output of S3 is unparalleled by other Vanguard skills. It's ready pretty quickly, so it's an amazing tool for holding down lanes at the beginning of the map, or quickly wiping enemies that spawn at the start of the map. The big feature of S3 that gets you off to a quick start is the DP swap. It lets you place one extra powerful unit early in the level, so your early combat power can take a big jump. There are a lot of options for how you configure your team to maximize the benefit of this DP swap. First, let's talk the lowest DP unit. Option 1 is to bring a robot. They cost 3 DP and they're trash. You're basically wasting a team slot, but you don't care even a little bit that their cost increased. This is a pretty solid option. There are a lot of levels where you don't end up using every last team slot, so you can usually spare one. Option 2 is Gravel. Gravel is a 6 DP executor, but she's actually quite useful. She's a great operator for bait and stall tactics due to her low cost, fast redeploy time, and high defensive stats immediately after deployment. The nice thing about Gravel is that stall tactics are rarely something you need in the first minute of the level. By the time you need her, 24 to 30 DP is probably something you can spare. If you retreat her before she dies, you'll get half that cost back anyway. And remember that her redeployment time will be reduced by SilverAsh's talent, so you can keep using her afterwards on a quick cycle. Option 3 is any other cheap Helidrop unit. Other Executors, Chargers, or Agent Vanguards are all options here. If your plan is to retreat them promptly, you'll get a refund on the higher cost, a 100% refund in the case of Chargers, and the fast redeploy on Agents or Executors will continue synergizing with SilverAsh's talent for the rest of the level. Now then, who are the best targets for the expensive side of the swap? You might be thinking it'd be fun to drop a Juggernaut like Mudrock or Penance in the first few seconds of the map, but that's hard to pull off. Since the skill prioritizes guards, casters, and snipers, you have to build a team without any of those, or at least make sure all the ones you have are on the field before you pop the skill. You might occasionally do this in a weird stage with a severely restricted team size, but it won't happen much. The more reliable way to do this is actually with S2 and the Mulesys trick. What are the high DP guard, caster, and sniper subclasses that will tend to show up here? The highest group are AoE classes. Blast casters like Ifrit are really interesting. Not every level has the sort of layout where Ifrit shines, but when they do, deploying her as your second unit is loads of fun. The other expensive AoE classes are Splash and Chain Casters, or Spread Shooters and Artillerymen. None of these classes have anyone truly exceptional, but they have A rank options that you might reach for occasionally. Since SilverAsh already brings good AoE damage on his S3, he probably reduces your demand for any of these classes. At the 24 to 26 DP range is where you find the highest concentration of S rank options. Crusher and Solo Blade guards, Besieger and Flinger snipers, or Mystic and Phalanx casters all lie in this band, and this is almost certainly what you want to target for the best results. Olpianos, Wishadel, and SilverAsh Alter are the very best options here, but there's a pile of other operators from these classes that you won't be sad to deploy earlier than usual. They'll also get plus 4 SP from him. I don't see any units in this range for whom that's transformative, but it's a nice perk. SilverAsh deserves special mention because she synergizes so beautifully with SilverAsh. His talent too makes her even tankier than she already is, and he covers her weaknesses perfectly. Her S2 is an awesome AFK skill whose only drawback is that it takes most of a minute before she's able to start attacking. If you deploy her right after popping SilverAsh's S3, she'll attack using his skill for the first 48 seconds of deployment, and then be ready with her own skill immediately after that. These siblings make a pretty wild team. The next part of S3 worth discussing is the Fragile effect. 30% Fragile on anybody hit by a fast AoE attack is a great bonus. It increases all damage except elemental damage received by the target, effectively reducing their max HP and making them easier to kill. This is a great damage amplifier for boss killing. You can pop the skill and give the blizzard to one of your big nukers to pump up their damage to help drop a big target. The big consideration here is the timing. His skill has a 48-second uptime, then a 55-second downtime. That's a really long activation, but also a long downtime. 48 seconds is not quite long enough that it can span the revive and invulnerable phase of a typical 2-stage boss. So you'll either need to plan to save it for their stage 2, or else engage their second form a minute later when the skill is ready to go again. SP battery units like Colapsus can help compress his downtime, so if you time it just right, you can try and overlap his downtime with the boss's invulnerability. The last strategy point to think about for S3 is how it changes his talent 1. The Blizzard has a DP cost of 19, so it grants his talent to a pretty wide range of operators, but unlike S2, he won't be moving a lot of units down below the Blizzard to gain that bonus. Executors who start at 9 DP will pick up the redeployment reduction even on their 3rd and 4th deployments, so that first potential upgrade on Texas or Yato can be nice. So overall, S3's synergy list looks a little different than S2's. It still pairs well with Executors due to his talent, but with a risk of making their first deployment more expensive. He pairs well with a single high DP, high damage unit that you may want to deploy quickly, but actively pushes you away from adding other high DP units that might steal the DP swap targeting. And he amplifies all manner of nukers and boss killers by just straight up adding 30% to their damage output with his skill. That's it for his skill synergies, but I also want to talk about talent synergies. Talent 2 gives boosts to other Kierag operators. Bonuses like this tend to make good units better, but don't make bad units good. But this is most interesting for the Kierag operators that were already worth using. Dagonbreaker, Gnosis, and both forms of SilverAsh and Praminix. There are a few other interactions here worth calling out. First, Gnosis. His talent can add up to 60% fragile effect to frozen enemies within his range. SilverAsh's S2 brings a new way to proc cold and freeze on demand. With Gnosis and SilverAsh, you can get the fragile benefits of SilverAsh's S3, but with the uptime and reliability of his S2. Add Alter for additional layers of cold, and winter is coming to Terra. Second, Matterhorn. With an extra 120 defense and HP regen, he's way more competitive with similar rarity defenders like Quora. Not meta relevant, but maybe a worthy cheap pull in integrated strategies or a viable early game defender for new accounts who have SilverAsh. One last thing we'll cover are skill masteries. For all that SilverAsh does, he actually does not gain all that much from Masteries. S2 increases its attack multiplier by about 20%, from 320% to 380% across 3 levels of Mastery. At the 3rd level of Mastery, the cold lasts 1 second longer, and he gains 1 more initial SP. There's no improvement in the DP generation. S3 likewise gains about 18% damage. First skill activation can improve by 4 seconds. Each level of Mastery adds 1 DP to the total, and the 3rd level of Mastery bumps the fragile effect from 25% to 30%. Again, no change to the skill duration or cycle time. Neither of these feels essential. If you use him all the time, you'll eventually want Masteries just to squeeze every last bit of potential out of him, but if you're short on resources, he's definitely not as sensitive to Masteries as some other operators are. Holy cow, this has been a long video, but that feels appropriate for this new strategist archetype. There's an awful lot here, and I'm sure I've even missed some of it. Let me know in the comments about any interesting off-label uses of SilverAsh that I didn't cover. As always, please like and subscribe if you like my content so I can keep reaching more players. Thanks for watching. See you next time.